be a little bit more enlightened about who we are as individuals. If we don't know about that, we're just a bunch of a bunch of individuals. But as we start to flow and create community, you start to recognize, oh, this person likes this, or that person likes that, or they like this type of music, or they like that type of thing. And that way, that generates a space. And when it comes to community, so this is more than a meeting. It's a sanctuary grounded in love, leadership, and impactful listening. So remember, this is going to be a dialogue. It's not going to, there's no monologue here, even though I will probably have teachings or shares that will help stimulate the conversation. But ultimately, this is about us listening to each other, growing, developing, maybe bouncing some stuff off of each other that we may be even in disagreement, which will actually be an excellent thing. Because sometimes that can lead to even greater debates and greater conversations. So we're not just, stuck on, okay, this is the flow of the conversation. And if we deviate from that, then it seems to be wrong. And actually, it isn't. Because we can start off one way and end up another, like we all have been and will continue to do so. So the Comeback Collective Circle extends the vision of Comeback Conversation with Dr. Clarke, creating a community where authentic voices rise and sacred wisdom flows. And before I go to the next slide, I just ask if Dr. Cheryl Clarke has anything to say that may be coming to her mind.
Yeah, I think when you were talking, um, this is a very good platform, but I think I don't want you to take for granted for people that don't possibly know you may get into it of the collective circle of the comeback conversations and why this was on your heart to kind of like revamp it. And so I think that would be indicative for people to kind of know that. And maybe you may get into that. I'm not sure. But I think this is a good space because of where we are in life and where people are in different areas of life. And just for when Dr. Clarke was introducing himself, introducing the platform, if I may, he said, sometimes we're going to have weeks where it's just the men. Sometimes we're just going to have, maybe I have my wife up here with me. Maybe I have different speakers up here with me. And when you said this comeback conversation, collective circles, is just that. There's going to be people that we've come back from things and these conversations, sacred conversation. I love this, what you said, sacred conversations, because every conversation, everything that we have done is a conversation for us to grow with. It's just not a monologue. And I think that this is a great platform and a space. And I can't wait to hear where we're going to share. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Cool. Mission and vision, what we stand for. First part of the mission is that we're igniting comebacks. We kindle the flames of emotional, spiritual, and communal transformation, believing that every setback is a setup for a sacred comeback. And that's where you start to recognize, even though we were talking earlier in the conversation about, different sports teams and bringing that into place, not every team is going to win every game. And not even perfection is something that you should be seeking for, even though we would love to be in a space where we never lose a game. But what would happen if we only won and never lost? Then you would never really experience or really respect winning. And so, even some of those areas that we recognize in our respective lives, we start to understand that, wait a minute, sometimes I was supposed to experience whatever it is, even though you may not necessarily like it. We're not saying that you should be going through life looking for losing. No, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that you're in a space and place where you're saying, wait a minute, okay, what was I supposed to learn from that? What was I supposed to be transformed through? I remember there were times where I've had, businesses before and some of them failed. I remember when I was into, selling satellite dishes and all that stuff in the different respective companies. And, after a while, they worked for a season and then it fizzled out, or whatever the universe allowed for it to dissolve, it dissolved. Those can be considered failures if I stayed there. they could have been, things that can generate and say, that's who I am as an individual if I stayed there. And so igniting comebacks allows us the opportunity to recognize how we can be well positioned, how we can be well thought out, and on top of that, how we can see that certain things are flowing in that space. Which leads to the next point: creating or created sacred space. We cultivate environments for honest conversations and collective elevation where vulnerability becomes strength and transparency births freedom. That was part of the reason why I was asking that question. And, we're always going to, I'll just pick up a topic when it's time for the throwback moment so everyone can be in the space and share something that's going on, or, share a little bit of something about you, which is very vulnerable. And one of the things I got to give Dr. Cheryl Clarke for, Dr. Cheryl Clarke for myself, is that there were times where I was very guarded. I was more guarded. And, not really, my body would be there, but I wasn't really participating. And one of the things that I gotta give her credit for
Hello?
is that she
Why
gave.
you was on here and then jumped off?
Hello, 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 hello. Okay, can we please keep it down? Okay, there
She's
we go.
muted.
Okay, thank you. And we cultivate environments for honest conversations and collective elevation where that vulnerability, and going back to what I was saying, getting back on my train of thought, is that there are times that we all have to be vulnerable. And vulnerability actually brings you into a space of being strong. See, when you run around trying to be the superhero, and trying to me is one of those curse words like want. When you running around and trying to be the superhero and everything and saying, nothing doesn't bother you, or life doesn't happen, or those things that may occur, is that, that's life usually telling you, okay, this is something that you have to address. And once you address it, you allow yourself to be in the space where you get to be elevated, because now you're allowing yourself to be seen, like as when we asked those questions earlier. And there was no wrong answer about what you considered your throwback when it comes to music. There's no wrong. You like what you like. There's nothing. Oh my God, this person liked dancehall music, and what does that have to do with it? I love dancehall music. I love 80s and 90s R&B. I love 70s or 60s or 50s or whatever, or things that I know that we as a community or our forefathers and ancestors helped to create. Why not? There's nothing diminishing about that. And leading to the last part of this embodiment and this vision of the mission statement is we embody love leadership. Why do I say that? Because when we even go from the spiritual sense of thinking about agape-ness, when you hear people say, I got agape love, you know what that means, right? That means you love for all. Now, it doesn't mean you have to like everything. There's a big distinct difference in that. You don't have to like everything. That doesn't mean just because you don't like someone doesn't love someone. I may not like some of the things that my children do, or they may not like some of the things that their parents have did, but that doesn't mean that takes away the love. And so if you're not allowing love to be a part of your leadership, then you have to really check yourself as a leader. You have to check yourself as being a part of the community. You have to check yourself to say, it's not about just what you can get, but if you're stimulating a real definitive back and forth, you recognize that you are responsible to give and to take. Never look in a space where you're not supposed to be able to say, wait a minute, you're supposed to receive. Like how today's a birthday. People on birthdays, you give gifts, you give possibilities, you give thoughts, you give, areas where, you stimulate some sort of it's not so much transactional, but it's acknowledgement. And so that's part of generating or showing your love. And so when we practice leadership that listens deeply and leads from love, understand that true authority comes from authentic service. So, Dr. Cheryl Clarke, you have any thoughts about, this mission for this particular platform as we're starting to share it?
Yeah, I think that when you are sharing that we're all human beings and we're all connected. I think we forget that at times because things happen to us and we take it very personally. Yes,
Mm,
you're sharing from a personal standpoint, but there's only, what they said, a couple of degrees of separation.
6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, thank you. And when you look at that, just because like the Franklins are all the way in Florida, but we're connected in some sort of way. And what you did in the very beginning was you connected us in a certain sort of kinds of way. And what I liked that what you had on there was you had different generations. So anybody that could have came on, because our throwback is not our children's throwback.
Hmm.
Let's just be honest with it. So these conversations, these comeback conversations, at any level you can have a comeback. Now, what is your comeback conversation going to be for others to learn from that conversation? So whereas um, Mr. Richards is from another part of the world,
Hmm.
but he's here sharing his conversation with us surrounding what his take is. So I like this because you're bringing us all together, and that's what Jesus did. Jesus brought different people from different areas, different areas of life, ages, sex, and brought them together to have a comeback conversation. I'm complete.
Thank you for that. And as my wife shared just now, just brought to me, even though they're not um, how should I say, supporting the platform, but I would say if you get the opportunity to watch the initial season of a series called Testament, that will be a great service for yourself. So you figure out how you can take advantage of the opportunity, which actually help establish me into the reworking along with Dr. Cheryl Clarke. Dr. Cheryl Clarke was very instrumental in this because, as much as that the previous dispensations were working, something had to be elevated. Sometimes we have to get out of our own gaze and recognize what's the broader picture. And when you recognize that there's a broader picture, then you start to understand you're willing to invest in that, you're willing to develop it, and you're willing to take it to those next steps, which are very, very necessary. We can never be stuck in the space of just saying it's one way. There are many different tributaries. That's why there are over 8 billion people on this planet. So that means there's 8 billion ways that people can experience the light thereof. Now, the power of sacred circles, why we gather. And that's why we're building community here. And it's not only just the individuals here, there are certain things that we're going to continue to develop online, certain things as part of this rebranding. I know Dr. Cheryl Clarke will be in the background assisting me on certain things when it comes to how, I'm going to look via the World Wide Web and things of that nature. And it's good to give people their credit where credit is due. And even some of you who are here will play a part in this. Why? Because you're beneficial. We're connected some way and somehow. So sacred circles have been humanity's original technology for healing and transformation. In our circular gatherings, that's why it's the Comeback Collective Circle, we restore what hierarchy fractures and reclaim what isolation has stolen. Here, no one is above, no one is beneath. We are all co-creators in the dance of divine conversation. And I always go back to the standpoint of King Arthur in England. Now, King Arthur was the king, like the same way that I lead this community or I am leading in this respective space. But at the same time, King Arthur was wise because he was the first one that started to create a table that wasn't more hierarchical. He created the round table. That's one of the greatest testaments that he created, which ultimately led into, parliamentary ways and things of that nature when it comes to governance. And the reason why the round circle was, or the round table was so beneficial was that everyone knew who the king was still was, and he knew ultimately, he still had the responsibility and he was going to make a decision. But by being in a circle, you recognize that everyone's voice is in the matter. You didn't sit there and says, "Oh, you're just a lowly person down at the other end of the table, and just sit there and be quiet." No, wait a minute. You got something to say. Throw your thought into there. Maybe that thought is going to be the thing that's going to help us win, not help me win. help us win. And when you start to recognize that circles are around us or circular shapes are around us, it's recognizing at times that, we can start one way, but you can't tell me when the beginning or end of a circle is. You can't. You can't. Now, that 360 degrees is beneficial, but it's not something to say, oh, this point is the start of the circle. No, that's not necessarily true. Because even in a revolution or a rotation, you start to recognize, because of the constant movement and constant, if you get into physics, you're starting to recognize that it's all relative. So there's nothing to say, oh, it starts, no, or it started, no, it didn't start there, because it's moving. So trust as a foundation. We build upon an unshakable trust, knowing that authentic connection requires radical vulnerability. Yes, there may be times, maybe it may be in the men's only conversations, maybe times where Dr. Cheryl will be having a woman's only conversation, which would be part of the platform or part of her platform. And sometimes you got to get vulnerable. If you're truly looking for a space where you're allowing yourself to develop, sometimes you got to get as naked as possible. And we're not talking about getting naked here on the platform, so get that out of your mind. But for your own self, sometimes you have to strip all those layers and start to recognize, like, wait a minute, I got to look at myself the same way how my body is at this particular time. Sometimes you got to look in that mirror and be like, yo, if it's something that you feel that can be done better, then why aren't you? And that's when you have those face-to-face conversations with yourself and recognize even you are circular as a being. So transparency as practice. We choose the courage of truth-telling and understanding that what we hide keeps us bound. So yeah, there may be times where we have certain conversations where, it's not about, outing yourself or sharing things that you may feel that is doesn't have to be shared in a particular open space. But there are times where, those things that we attempt to hold on to, or as, I know for a fact that happens in the African American experience, what goes on in this house you don't talk about. And it's like, that wasn't necessarily a good thing, because that kept us away from mental health services. That kept us away from things that would allow us to process certain things. And we may have perpetuated and kept certain things going, ongoing, and it didn't work. It didn't help. It didn't give any life as much as that we were existing. So there's a difference. You have to choose every single day. Are you living your life or are you existing? And if you're choosing life, then there are times where I got to sit there and be like, oh, I was wrong in that. Okay, let me correct myself. Let me apologize. Or maybe I was right. Okay, that's good. That's a good thing. But now you don't get full of yourself because you were correct or right. You start to recognize, because just as much as that you can be right, you can be wrong. And at times it could be just a difference of opinion. Transcendence as a goal. We reach beyond our individual limitations towards collective breakthrough and shared elevation. See, if I'm building a community here, I'm starting to recognize it's not about, what it is that you contribute from a financial sense or a spiritual sense or even a conversational sense. It's like, what are we doing to really transcend and start to put ourselves in spaces where we can be of benefit to others? I know there are times that Dr. Cheryl Clarke talks with me, we in our respective sacred times and those sacred conversations about what type of legacy are we living? How can we impact the people not only in the city that we came from, but where we're at now? And you start to recognize all of that is about transcendence. That transcendency is allowing you to say, wait a minute, we can be repositioned from a geographical sense, but that still doesn't negate your mandate to go out there and to reach others and to be helpful to others. That transcendence is still there if you're willing to participate within it. And, as a informational note, emotional safety equals spiritual clarity. When we feel held, we can truly hear the divine whisper within and around us. With that being said, Dr. Shaw, you have anything to share? And believe in me, the rest of you, I'm going to start calling on your names as well. So be prepared. I may ask you to chime in with a thought as well, but we're getting this foundation established as we're having this conversation today.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was going to ask, does anybody have any questions surrounding any of the foundation practices or goals that came up? Because I do believe, because this is a conversation, like Dr. Clarke said, and he was making that. So if anybody has any questions or comments thus far, please open up your mic and, um, ask him and as we gather. I like what you talked about the circle. The circle is when we coming together, and even in our culture as Africans, they would always get around a sacred circle, that we will always I remember at church we'll always hold hands and get in that circle at the end, because a circle means unity, and beginning to understand we don't always have to agree, but let's get into the sacred space of understanding that we can practice a foundation of that, of being in oneness. Now I'm complete.
Excellent. Any other thoughts from any of the participants this evening? Come on, open up your mic. And during this time, you don't have to worry about you being seen. Your voice is what matters. Your thoughts are what matters.
I'll share.
Excellent.
I can appreciate this group, and what you illustrated through the beginning slides is that you created a safe space for transparent conversation that, as you also spoke about previously, we were, I want to say taught, but seems like it's generationally embedded to keep what happens in the house, and you don't realize the trauma or activities that you create for yourself based on what you've learned that is holding you back in the present, and that you may unfortunately also pass down to your children. So it's great to have a space like this where we can learn tools that we can take out of here and teach others and just model higher vibrational living. I'm complete.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Thank you for that thought. Anyone else?
I do. I want to say too that we was taught that we shouldn't tell what we do inside the house, but a lot of times that's when things happen to us, and we never put it out about what happened to us. Or we couldn't tell that parent because we felt like that parent would turn against us, make us feel bad about what we said.
No, thank you for that. That's so true. And that becomes, and I'll never step into space because my wife is a powerful psychotherapist. But for me, knowing the little bit of psychology within my own standpoint as an educator, you start to recognize those, especially traumatic experiences that we may have experienced as children, or things that get embedded within us, because I remember that embedding. We have to recognize that in order to be as powerful as you can be, you have to be free of some of this stuff. And some of the stuff you get free of through conversation, through seeking out wisdom, seeking out the right mentors, seeking out people who are not necessarily doing stuff just for themselves. See, if a mentor is just only getting something from you, not willing to pour into you, that's not your mentor. See, a mentor is there to push you. And why is that? Like, I have a mentor. I have a mentor that will push me and stuff like that. But then I started to recognize the benefit of a mentor, because that mentor is allowing me to see a possibility. And then I can choose to say, am I going to be exactly like that, or I'm going to be the first Dr. Gregory? That's why we're not building copies here. We're building a situation where when you feel transparent enough and you have the trust, and those 3 T's right now, the trust, transparency, and transcendence, when you can have those working in your life, you start to recognize that some of the things that you did previously that that don't work, but we keep trying to say, well, that's just what we do. That doesn't work. You have to be willing to be like, nah, we can't do that. And like as Dr. Cheryl alluded to earlier, we was having some candid conversations that we're not getting into fully here. But, I was even giving her some coaching around that. And not from the sense because she's my wife, but from the standpoint of recognizing I desire for her to be her best self. And if she's not working at an optimum level for herself, not for Gregory, but for herself, then that trickles down into other areas. And then we start to recognize why it seems like things are boggling down, or I'm mad and angry. And sometimes you got to look yourself in the mirror and be like, did you create your own drama? But then you want to point the finger outside of there to make it seem like it's something else. And that's why it's the power of the sacred circles here. When we start to say, wait a minute, okay, well, let's get together and have a conversation. Let's hear some real feedback. But beyond just hearing, now you start to recognize, are you willing to implement? Because you can hear the greatest thoughts of all time, and people will sit there and still do nothing with it and wonder why their life is not where it's supposed to be. Then it's not a problem of the mentor or the information. Now we have to look at you as an individual and say, why are you choosing not to? But we'll get into that as we go along. Now, this is part of what we establish. I started to recognize, I started to combine certain things, certain ethics. And I started to recognize, even though we have this ethic that we do for our couples and individuals that we do in our coaching and counseling practice, started to recognize how powerful this framework is for this platform. Because as I started to recognize that if these 4 A's are not just for couples, these 4 A's are something that can be utilized from a space that if we're developing a community here that has our tenets, that knows exactly what we are in expectation of, and also recognizing what we have to be grounded in, then it becomes even more beneficial and effective. So the foundation, as part of the mission here, and we are utilizing the power of the 4 A's framework. So if you don't have that book, please go to Amazon right now. Yes, I'm doing a shameless plug. Go to Amazon, type in the power of the 4 A's. You can get the original, but I would suggest, get the remix. You can get the remix on Amazon as well. Get that book as a part of your library. You should have that book as a part of your library because you start to recognize the keys of what we have produced and what we have shared here in this area of the marketplace to be a benefit for our community. And that's why we're called to families, we're called to men, we're called to women, we're called to everyone. And we have all those relevant conversations that will come into play. So, step 1, acceptance. You are welcome as you are. No mask required, no performance necessary. Your authentic self is not just tolerated, but celebrated as a gift to our collective healing. So if you come here thinking that you gotta, think this is Eyes Wide Shut or this is Halloween, then you think you're doing me a disservice or doing the community a disservice. You're actually doing yourself a disservice. After a while, you have to start to accept that, wait a minute, where are the things that I've jacked up in? Where are the things I may have messed up upon? Where are the things that now that I can be in that space to start to drop all those layers, which helps you to drop that mental weight. And a lot of times we hold on to weight, and most of it starts in our mentals. Like when I started to actually lose weight, and Dr. Shaw keeps pushing me to always talk about that. I'm in my 250s right now, but there was a time frame I was like 420, 430. In order for me to drop that weight and even to be in a space where it's pretty much not coming back, is that I had to drop the mental weight. So it could have been something that, I'm starting to lose weight and this, that, and the third. But if my thinking was staying stinking, that weight would come right back. So now you start to recognize what is it that Gregory had to do to start to accept Gregory. And once Gregory starts to accept Gregory and say, okay, I've got some flaws. I cannot be perfect, even though I'm a Virgo. But that's not the case. That's nevertheless. But that I don't necessarily have to be in the space of being this perfectionist. It's like, wait a minute, okay, I'm going to screw up. Okay. Yes, I need assistance. Yes, I need love. Yes, I need affection. Yes, I need all these other aspects. Like, wait a minute, oh my God, I'm starting to accept Greg and starting to recognize how powerful Greg can be. Not should be, can be. Which leads to affection. You are embraced with genuine care and divine love. We see you not as a project to fix, but as a sacred being deserving of unconditional love. That goes back to the agapeness. And sometimes we have to press ourselves. I didn't say me press you. I said sometimes we have to press ourselves to be like, when we start saying certain things, are we really moving in what we're saying? Lip service is great, but if you're not pushing yourself forward, if you're not practicing what you preach, okay, that sounds good. Okay, let's celebrate, raise whatever, resources that we need and just keep it pushing, and you don't really get any benefit out of it. Just to say that you're in the community. That doesn't work. Recognize that even you have to give yourself affection. As much as I desire affection, I have to give Greg affection. You have to love yourself. And you have to recognize at times if you're not really loving yourself, then you can't get mad at someone saying they're not loving you properly, because if you're not doing it properly, then you can't expect that outside. Appreciation. Your presence and voice matters deeply. That's why we want to make sure that everyone gets their voice in the conversation. Every word you speak, every silence you hold, every tear you shed adds to the tapestry of our shared transformation. Crying is good. Sometimes, we don't want to do that ugly cry. But crying is actually good. It actually releases something within ourselves, because now you allowing even your physical body to be in a space. And it's not that you need to be crying every day. No. If you're in a space where you're crying every day, that's not good. But sometimes when you get to that space where you may be triggered by a moment and we want to hold it in because we want to be so hard and tough. It's like, no, okay. Even if you feel like you want to be that man on one man, it's like, I ain't going to cry in front of everyone. Well, go in the corner. Let it out. Appreciate the fact that you are finally starting to, whatever it is, that it doesn't have power over you, but you now are taking your power back, as you would hear on Dr. Clarke's platform about Speak Your Power Now, which is an affiliate with us. So there's no rhyme or reason not to conversate or cross talk about that. So when you think about that, are you appreciating yourself? And then it gets to agreement. We align towards a shared transformation. While we honor diverse perspectives, we unite in our commitment to growth, healing, and collective elevation. See, this community is about recognizing that I desire Nicole to be her best self. I desire Dr. Cheryl to be her best self. William, Edward, Danielle, Darnetta, Trevor, Mark, Gary, some of the other individuals who may not be in earnest, all the different individuals who are aligned with this movement, who may not necessarily be here in physical form or in conversation. It's like there's a desire, not a want. There's a desire like, okay, how can we make sure that you're getting something out of this, that you're leveling up? So with that being said, before I move to the next slide, any thoughts or questions or any statements that anyone desires to share? Because even your silence is speaking. You got to remember that. Even your silence speaks. Because we can get confronted by certain things, which forces us, I ain't going to say that. What I need to talk about. It's like, what is holding your tongue? We know in Proverbs 18:21, life and death is in the power of the tongue, but what is holding your tongue? What is keeping you from being in acceptance, affection, appreciation, or even agreement with yourself? See, we look a lot of times outside of ourselves, not recognizing these 4 A's are such a great benchmark, because we can be seeking these things from our partners, seeking these things from our children, seeking these things from associates, and all the other different things, all the respective webs of communities that we may be a part of. But are we giving it to ourselves? So, Dr. Cheryl, what do you see, or what do you feel, as I know that you know about this very wholeheartedly?
I know you need all four. You can't just have one without the other. So acceptance is the first thing. And if you look at affection, they had a they had a um it's escaping me now. They had a study with monkeys, and the study was they left one monkey in a cage by itself, and then they had another one with the mother. And you need affection, even with animals. You need affection. You are nurtured in that space, and a lot of times we do not know how to have all three. So you need affection, you need appreciation, you need agreement, all those things. And I don't think we're taught that as humans. So
Mm.
today we thank you for accepting Dr. Clarke's invitation. That's number one. We appreciate you for being here. I hope that you are loving on yourself, the affection that you need. I hope that someone else is loving on you. And the agreement to say, I'm going to come back and participate. So whatever, and right at the top of the hour, maybe we should say, I'm going to agree to participate, whatever that looks like at my level, whether it's in the chat, because we know some of you may be, in a compromising situation where you can't write or say open your mic, but the comeback conversation is more about having the conversations with everyone. And so every voice matters. So like Dr. Clarke says, Speak Your Power Now is my platform. It's because our voice was taken from us as people of color. We weren't allowed to speak. We weren't even allowed to speak to each other. We weren't allowed to even read. We wasn't allowed to do a lot of things. So as you begin to develop your voice and your experiences, be able to share that so people can grow from that. Dr. Clarke.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shaw. Any thoughts before we move on to the next slide? Excellent. The philosophy, always becoming, our cultural ontology and ongoing breakthroughs. We reject the lie of static existence. Let's say that again. We reject the lie of static existence. If you're here just to exist, that is not living. It says in a good book that you are supposed to have life and have it more abundantly. And it say to exist and hope for an abundant existence. Existence is not living. Our biochemical movements in our bodies, those keep us alive. And those functions are existing. Your pancreas can't speak, but it does have a language. Your liver doesn't have a voice, but yet it speaks by working every single day since the day you were born. Same thing with all the other different respective parts of your body. So if you like to be a muscle, even though we know the skin is the biggest muscle on the whole entire body, if you want to just be a muscle, then you desire just to exist. But when you're living, you start to recognize that, wait a minute, I'm positioning myself that every single day I'm choosing for prosperity, or I'm choosing to develop. I'm choosing to let go of the wounds of the past. I'm choosing not to hold on to that thing that I thought that had a stranglehold on me. No, let that crap go. Because as we continue on this thought, we are not fixed beings trapped in past definitions or limited by present circumstances. You'll see certain things that may happen in the news cycles and, oh my God, it's like the sky is falling. No, the sky is not falling. You choose if you're going to call it so, because you're choosing your day. Now, you can be aware of certain things that are happening around you, which you should be wise in, because now you're not moving in ignorance. Oh, I didn't know about that. Why didn't you know about that? And as Dr. Cheryl Clarke alluded to, during the times when it was prohibited from us from reading and learning and expressing. And, I know in New Orleans, there was a special place because New Orleans was a little freer for the slaves, where on Sundays, they would go to a certain circle, and that's where they were able to still have their expressions from the motherland, and that's how you get, you had certain things that led into certain possibilities which held out culturalism. You start to understand that why they didn't want us to talk. Because if you have the ability to speak, then all of a sudden that means you're in communication. Communication will lead you into thinking. Okay, thinking is another aspect of it. Then if I'm thinking about stuff and I have the ability to write, now I'm starting to document. Now I'm starting to document, that means I have the ability to share what I've documented with those around me so that they can be a benefit from it. Now all of a sudden, we're starting to move in a more thank you for that. Congo Square. Thank you, Sister Nicole. Congo Square in New Orleans. And so when you start to think about that, there are times when even in our platform right now where it's like, wait a minute, put your voice in the matter. And some have and some haven't as so far. Because there's no finite thing here. But then you have to check your way of being. You have to check your ontology. Why is your ontology keeping you in a space where you're just stuck? Or you don't feel that, do I really have something to share? Yes, you do. Because we are all unfolding wisdom, ever becoming vessels of divine possibility. If you don't look at yourself in the space of possibility, no one else will. Don't look outside yourself for possibility if you're not generating a space of possibility. I remember the other day, probably one of my social media posts, I said, I have to be my greatest cheerleader, even though I know my wife outside of me is. But I have to be my greatest cheerleader. Because even if I expect her with the pom-poms jumping around and this and that, if I'm not doing that for myself, then I'm doing her a disservice. Because it's like, oh my God, how come you ain't cheer for me? How come you ain't doing that? You celebrate me. Hey, Gregory, are you celebrating you? But you expecting Cheryl to be out there with the pom-poms and jumping around and flips and did it? Are you celebrating you? Are you being affirmed or at tone or at one with yourself? So if I'm at one with myself, I'm going to love Greg. And then I can receive love and see it being dispensed towards me because I'm taking care of me. So cultural wounds. We acknowledge the deep injuries inflicted by systems of oppression and generational trauma. We're not discounting that. But this community is about building ourselves up from those layers because we have some great and powerful shoulders that we are standing upon. We will never minimize what our ancestors went through. Don't get it twisted. But we recognize where we are now. And we're still empowered by those sacrifices, even some of those atrocities, and even those things that we still have to be in cultural conversation about. So we recognize how powerful we are as people, regardless that we all came from the greatest continent on the planet. Sites of renewal. We transform those very wounds into places where divine healing springs forth like water from the rock. You know that story. They got water from the rock. They were thirsty. I'm thirsty. I'm so thirsty. Thought there was no water here. Well, you're faithful enough to move and recognize that, yeah, you're going through something. But you can transform it if you so choose to. Or you can keep saying that you're moving in a space where you're not really acknowledging the faith of yourself. And then, of course, no water will come from the rock. Breaking through. We understand that sometimes we must break down to break through. Dissolution precedes reconstruction. That's like patching up a hole in the wall knowing that the leak wasn't fixed in the wall. Okay, we're gonna fix the wall. So did we make sure that the wall or whatever was going on when we had to put a hole in the wall was fixed? No, don't worry about that. We just that, and that becomes a mask. Oh no, just cover it. Hurry up. We gotta look good. Whoa. That's not looking good. That's actually more of a detriment. Like, did you take care of what's going on inside? No. Let's just keep going. No. Whoa. Did you take care of what's going on inside of you? Have you allowed yourself to be in that developmental space to say, yo, oh, no, I really need to address this, or I really need to seek out some higher level of care, or maybe I need those one-on-one sessions or counseling, make the investment in myself. Yes, you got to make investments in yourself. Because these systems that are around attempted to position us to be kind of cheap at times. And I recognize you have to invest in yourself. You have to invest in those things that, oh, I desired riches. You know, eventually those two individuals who hit that Powerball, I hope that part of their repertoire, on top, again, the right lawyers, private bankers, all that stuff, that they find someone that they can sit with that can allow them to help them really process where they're at now in that respective blessing. Because even though it's a blessing, if you're not prepared for it mentally, it'll disappear. And that's not worth it. That's not what you are supposed to have the experience through. And this quote by Rumi: "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Say it one more time. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Any thoughts, any shares, anything that's coming up, especially as you see this ontology slide as we're having this conversation? Dr. Cheryl, anything coming up for you?
No, I think you kind of summed it up, and with that, and when cultural things do happen, things do show up, learning to ask for support and higher level of care is out there for a reason. So things probably may come up in these conversations, but don't be afraid to like inbox one of us to say, do you have any support systems outside? Even if you don't feel comfortable saying it verbally out here, you can always inbox myself, Dr. Clarke, um, you know, if you don't want to say it out loud. That's what I like to say.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. The practice: enrollment as a sacred act, becoming the space where others say yes. And this is how, as a part of how we are practicing in our respective lives as business people, as family members, we're always in a space of enrollment. We're always enrolling people. If you need assistance, that's enrolling. If you're supporting something, you are enrolled in that. If you're part of a respective community and you are willing to be with other like minds who may share something, you are in enrollment. The reason why here, enrollment as a sacred act, because sometimes we don't recognize that we are enrolled in certain things because we're doing it from this automatic space, which I've learned and was exposed to from Dr. Cheryl. And sometimes when you're doing stuff from an automatic space, it's like, it's just, you're snapping your finger. Why are you snapping your finger? I don't know, because other people snap their finger. No. Find out the why. Because you find out the why, now you can be empowered. Now you can make the relevant decision. Like, we know the story about, there was a time in the South, and especially in our community, where people would buy a big ham, cut off like half of it, and throw that half away, not recognizing as that thing kept moving in perpetuity. And say if it got to the 21st century space, and people's like, wait a minute, you just bought a 20-pound ham and you cut half of it. Why you do like 5 pounds of it or 6 pounds of it away? Well, that's what I saw my mother do. And then you ask the mother. That's what I saw my grandmother do. And you ask the grandmother if she's still around. Grandmother said, that's what your great grandma did. You come to find out, the reason why great grandma did that because she didn't have a big enough pot. But yet you here in this 21st century with all the conveniences, but you're still doing something from a cultural standpoint, not recognizing it doesn't work. Because you're moving on automatic. You were enrolled into something that after a while, did you ask the question, says, why we do this? And could we do it a little better? Let's see. I see something in the chat. Let's see. I recall that story about the ham. It definitely applies. Thank you for that. Mr. Singleton. So beyond selling, it's not about selling something. Enrollment is not selling. It's inviting alignment with divine purpose. It's not about convincing. We create conditions where souls recognize their calling and step forward willingly. That's why I said, even here tonight or during this conversation, even your silence is speaking. But it's not a bad thing. Before people, oh my God, you're not saying anything, so it's the wrong thing. No, just your silence is speaking. That's great. If your silence is speaking, that means, something is being touched and expressed, and, it's helpful, because that means we know a nerve is being touched, and that's a good thing. You are the clearing. You become the sacred space others can step into. Your presence, your peace, your power creates an atmosphere where transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable.